Today on the Dyno Construction Podcast, Justin and David talking tight ends here. We're going to hit risers, fallers, trades, strategies, our startup conversation as well. Pretty much everything tight ends, just the two of us here tonight. David and I were at Scott Fish Live Denver on Saturday. David was just there for emotional support. He's doing a slow draft later. Got my draft board behind me. Pretty excited. I'll link that draft board in the episode below if anyone wants to take a look at it. Very fun setting, and it's a heavy tight end premium. So I think that kind of segues right into some of our later conversations here. Before we get into actual strategy, David, we've got our graphic right here. It's startup ADP. Do you want to walk us through what you're seeing here from the last 5 years of the top 12 at this position?
Yeah, first, before we jump in there, Justin, I got to ask, have you made your donation yet to Fantasy Cares for your draft board? Promise, John, you were going to make one.
I have, and I actually have the donation link pinned in the episode description below as well.
Not everybody has anything to give. We all get that. But if you got anything, Fantasy Cares is a great way to give back. And it's the fantasy community doing great things. They do a lot of Toys for Tots things like that. But there's other ways that they help the community as well. But yeah, moving into our tight end video. So if you've been watching, this is something we've put up for every position. Some positions it's been a little more helpful than others. Essentially, we're looking at where the top 12 tight ends went each year. We're just looking at average ADP from May 1st to May 31st each season. That's just right the month after the NFL draft. So it's like the most clean first month of ADP you have for the new year. This one was a little weird. If you've been watching the other episodes, this one kind of looks like the wide receiver one at first. But if you look, we're looking at 11 rounds roughly, right? 11 rounds of data here. It's been significantly less than that before. So the gaps between these lines is a little bigger. I think my main takeaway here, to be completely honest with you, is this position is just very player driven. As you got the elite guys getting a little older, you're seeing the ADP drop a little bit. As we get Bowers coming in, as McBride establishes himself now as Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren. You see here in 2026, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 going about as early as any tight ends over this span. And that's just because we got 4 young guys that have a chance to be elite hammers. I think this position more than any other is just player driven. When we have the good young elite players, they're going to go early. And when you don't, people are just going to sit and wait.
Yeah, there's some interesting years on this graphic here. In fact, looking at 2022, we see a highly taken tight end 1, tight end 2. Might have been Kelsey and Pitts, or Andrews, might have been Pitts. And then 23 and 24, we see a big drop back at this position, right? And that's because either you have that guy or you don't at the tight end position. So when we don't see that certainty, it's actually pretty interesting that we don't see the certainty at the top end when we didn't have a Bowers and McBride kind of breakout. That actually led to in 20 at very least, not as much as in 23, some of the highest late round ADP of tight ends. So I just found that what I took away from that is when we don't have certainty, when we don't know what's going on at this position, people sit off early but take more chances on upside guys later. But I still think that there's some decent upside later on in tight end, although I think a lot of the luster has fallen off of some of it. Type of guys that we had some hope in doesn't have that luster. Obviously, Sadiq's got some upside, but it's a murky situation. So who is that guy in the later rounds? I think we're trending probably to where we're at right now. I think we're going to keep that top 1 and 2 about the same, but I wouldn't be surprised if later round tight ends stick a little bit closer to that higher 100-ish ADP for when we're seeing tight end 12 going off the board versus what we might have seen in some previous years. So I think we're going to regress on the back end of that blue line right there, even going forward. Because the position's not great after a certain point. Do you agree with that, David?
It's always the case. You either have a hammer or you sit and wait and just hope for a good week by the guy that you started, which is actually a great transition into our next segment if you'd like, just because we're talking about hammers here. So for this, Justin, just because some people don't play tight end premium is always a little bit different. Let's talk about it. Every question from no tight end premium, and then We can discuss different levels if you think it's relevant, but let's mostly just assume 175. If you think it's really that different, whether it's 1.5 or 2, and you want to mention it, go ahead. But we'll start with how much do you value a hammer at tight end? This one's kind of the same for me, whether it's premium or not, a lot. If you can get a hammer, it gives you true positional advantage because there just aren't many at tight end. There's maybe two or three, whether they're young or not. There's maybe two or three that score at the elite level. So if you have one, you almost always have a 3 to 5 point advantage over your opponent at one position, and that's a huge advantage in a week. They're hard to predict, and that makes it hard to buy and buy the right one. But when you get the right guy, it's really hard to let go of him. I think that's more how I look at it. It's hard to spend up for a guy if you're not very confident, but man, I don't know what it would take to get Bowers off me and the teams I have him. My answer doesn't change though for tight end premium or not.
David, let's even just define hammer, right? The obvious no-brainer is McBride and Bowers, and they're the value hammers as well as the production hammers. Then I think we have a 3 to 4 man tier of guys that I think we'd tier them into two separate tiers. I think our next tier would be Warren and Loveland, and then we'd see Fannin and Kraft in a next tier after that. So tier 2, tier 3, respectively. And I view all four of those guys as potential hammers and therefore worth investing in at relatively close to their price. Although I think I'd sell Loveland at his price. And I think you've said at the same time that if you can get close to a top end market value for him, you'd love to either pick up a first to get Warren, for example, or get Kraft maybe, or take something on top of him at a first, potentially late first to him to go up to Bowers, maybe if there's a tight end premium or if there isn't even. Is there anyone else? Is Kittle worth in the conversation of a potential production hammer off the injury? I think that's my list of 7 guys that I consider to be potential hammers, but honestly, only 2 of them that I feel to be sure hammers. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think McBride and Bowers are the two that you feel very confident in. Loveland's certainly trending that way. Warren, like you said. Fannin and Crafts, I don't know if they're going to score like a true difference maker. I think they have a chance to, though. And then, yeah, Kittle's definitely got to be mentioned because when I'm talking about a hammer here, I am talking about points, not so much value. There's different ways to accumulate value and things, but when we're talking about a hammer, we're talking about what are you doing in my lineup? And Kittle can give you positional advantage. And that's what you're really looking for if you're competing. How many ways can gain some positional advantage over your opponent? And tight end is just one of the easiest ways to do it if you got the right guy. Like you said, though, it's very scarce. There's maybe 2 guys that we're very confident in, a few other guys with some question marks, and then maybe a dark horse guy or two. But that's just how the tight end position rolls. And that's why the hammers are valuable.
Yeah, and to actually give my answer now that we've defined who the hammers really are, I value it a whole lot. But here's the question. Do I have an advantage at every other spot over people? If the answer is yes, then I'm going to overpay to get a tight end hammer. But if I'm starting something like Josh Downs and I'm starting Brenton Strange at tight end, I don't necessarily care which one of those 2 guys I upgrade to more of a hammer. I'm looking for whatever I think is the cheapest route to get there. I probably value it slightly more than the other positions. I would say tight end and quarterback are the ones where if I can get a weekly advantage at those 3 positions without paying something that's prohibitive to having a starting lineup, I'd love to. So I value it commensurate with I'd love to get advantage at this position quarterback, but I'm not willing to overpay. It's what position can I get that advantage at for the cheapest will still drive me. I want it more, but I'm not overpaying for it. So then what are we doing, David, if we can't get a hammer at tight end?
Here, the simplest answer here is just the cheapest common denominator, essentially. Now, if you can get one of these guys that we're talking about, Kraft or Fannin, or if you believe in Gadsden or Pitts or whoever, you get one of these guys that maybe is a hammer. I think that's okay, especially in a premium, non-tight end premium. Man, if I don't have a hammer, I don't really care. Give me someone that's going to score some amount of points and just someone that I'm okay starting. That I'd love to have a Pitts or a Fannin or, like I said, Warren, Laporta, one of those guys. But if I'm starting Hunter Henry or I don't know someone else in that neighborhood, Greg Dulcich, okay, whatever. I'm gonna use my value elsewhere because the reality is if you don't have a hammer tight end and non-tight end premium, they're not going to be impactful on your lineup no matter what. So spend your value elsewhere there in non-tight end premium. If it is a tight end premium, I'm a little more willing to hold some value on those middle guys that might actually be able to ascend. But I think that's how I look at it there if I can't get a hammer.
In non-tight end premium, I'm just as happy starting Evan Ingram, Travis Kelce if I can get him for dirt cheap, right? Anybody that's old and grimy that I can get without having to pay anything real for it, right? If there is a tight end premium, I'm chasing guys that I think are in good offenses with potential for volume. So in tight end premium, just because if we have a 1.5, 1.75, especially if it's like a two tight end premium, a guy with 5 receptions versus a guy with 3 is scoring quite a bit more points. So I'm not just thinking that game that you're thinking in a standard PPR league, which is the tight end going to get a touchdown. I'm kind of thinking, is that tight end getting 6 to 8 targets a week, even if they're only getting 10 yards a target? Because 6 for 32 in two tight end premium is north of 15 points, right? So you can look at a different, like Zach Ertz type of guy, someone that's just a catch and fall down safety blanket. And I do like to actually target those guys in tight end premium pretty excessively, honestly. I like to flex tight ends in that. But yeah, what you said, any guy. And then let's move on to ideal tight end roster construction. And just before we do, I'm not paying up for that cheaper volume guy. It's the cheapest guy that I think has volume. Like you said, if it's not a hammer, I don't want to pay more than a 2-3 swap for most of these types of guys. And ideal tight end roster construction. David, go ahead and take us in either one, your choice. I'll do the other one, and we'll see if we disagree.
Fair enough. I'll go with the easier one then, because for me, not a non-tight end premium, it's pretty simple. Whether it's a hammer or not, I want one guy that I'm confident plugging into my lineup. I don't want to have to think about it. And then I want someone else that I feel okay starting if that guy gets hurt or on that guy's bye week. And then if I have a taxi squad, I'm okay putting a few guys on it. We'll talk about that more here in a minute. But I don't want more than 2 tight ends total on my roster and non-tight end premium. Give me my bench spots for other things.
Yeah, in non-tight end premium, definitely agree. In tight end premium, we have a different story because tight ends, like I said, Zach Ertz last few years has been flex worthy. You could start him, flex him when healthy, and win championships with him in your flex. You cannot say the same thing in non-tight end premium about a lot of, and it's Hunter Henry, it's Juwan Johnson, it's there's so many tight ends that can get you 13th if you have a higher 1.75, close to 2 tight end premium, etc. In a 1.5 tight end premium, the numbers are a little bit lower, right? You might be at 11, 12, but it's not a horrible lineup hitting spot to get you through bye weeks and other stuff. So I think this is pretty similar to our wide receiver one that I'm very willing to hold. If I can start 3 tight ends or 4 tight ends, I'm willing to hold 5 or 6 grungy startable tight ends because things get ugly in the streets. Heck, I have a team that I made the playoffs in last year that in a bipocalypse situation, I think I had Mike Gesicki in my superflex. Things get bad. I won that week even. You never know what you're going to need. And I view it the same way as I do wide receivers, which is I want to be able to fill in all of my spots plus a couple more. So if it's in a tight end premium, they're a flex worthy play. So my tight end spot plus however many flexes I have, then I'm willing to roster 1 or 2 more as well. But those are more veteran tight ends. And then, David, do you have much of a disagreement there? Or can we move on to rookie tight ends?
My math is slightly different, but I think we land in the same spot. I start the same way I do with a non-tight end premium. I want one guy that I can start and then another guy behind him. And then after that, anywhere there's value in a guy that I'm okay starting or think has upside. I don't really like to limit it because every league's a little different, but much more willing to roster lower tight ends. So I'm sure we end up around the same.
I'm not saying that I need to have 5 tight ends, right? If I have my flexes are going to be wide receivers, that's just the team that I have, then I probably want 2 tight ends, what you said, and then maybe a couple on my bench that I could sub in for bye weeks. It's just a lot of the time in tight end premium, one thing I do notice is that the cheap, grungy Hunter Henry types of tight ends are a lot more bang for your buck for a bye week filler than buying a wide receiver that you'd actually feel good about starting on the bye week. So if you're looking to backfill flex spots cheap, I think tight ends are typically the way to go, but I do have to acknowledge every league is going to have slightly different markets, etc. So now let's move on to rookie tight ends. David, I typically love, and you mentioned already this, having rookie tight ends on my taxi squads. I have so very many teams where I have every guy you could possibly imagine that wasn't even drafted or was drafted. Like I have Michael Trigg, Endries, the tight end for Cincinnati, Kesman. I have all sorts of other guys along the lines of the two Jacksonville guys. I've got the guy that Houston took in the second round. I can't even remember their names, but if they were drafted or even signed, I don't much care if it's non tight end premium or tight end premium on one condition. In non tight end premium, I don't want more than one of these guys on my roster. I don't mind putting all 5 of them on my taxi squad, honestly, if I can't get anybody better, but I don't want more than 1 on my roster. In tight end premium, I don't really have any limits. Do you have any real variance there from that opinion?
Not really, no. I think the only thing I'll add to that is, though it's changing recently, tight end has always been a position that takes a little while to develop in the NFL. These guys are asked to do a lot schematically. They're asked to do a lot with their bodies. They're supposed to be fast and be able to block big guys. They have to learn how to do both these things. So putting them on your taxi squad for a year, letting them learn the NFL a little bit, being patient with them, sometimes can really pay off. And like you said, I've got tons of teams where I've got 2 or 3 of these tight ends on my taxi, 3 or 4 sometimes, depending on exactly how fab bidding went after the draft. And I spread it around. I want good exposure to this. Happens to be a pretty deep tight end class, so I'm spread around pretty thin, I think. But I try to spread it around to the tight ends that I like that went late, and you hope for a couple of hits. Last year I had a ton of Gadsden when he hit. It doesn't always pay off that quickly like that, but that's what you're looking for. I got him very cheap. I sold him, but some people would call cheap. Now I think it's probably closer to market value in some points, but compared to what I paid, it was a huge win. So that's like the dream case, obviously. Most of the time they're not going to hit, but that's the goal. So yeah, fill up your taxi with those tight ends. Be a little patient with them. Being on the taxi allows you to be a little more patient with them.
I think the following this question to its conclusion would be answering how do we approach them after their rookie year as well? Because guys that were taxi squad stashes, like Chigaquanco, I can't say his name, I never will be able to, now is coming onto his second contract and maybe into some potential value. We'll see what happens. Another name that comes to mind that could follow a similar trajectory, Michael Mayer, right? He's still behind Bowers, but he'll probably go somewhere eventually. What do you do with guys that maybe they're not hitting even start worthy ceiling? Are you willing to keep those guys, especially in a tight end premium? Because I think in a non tight end premium, that kind of answers itself a little bit.
Yeah, I guess you just have to cling to the information that you do get, whether that's still leaning a little on the prospect profile, whether that's some playing time, whether the veteran tight end above him left. The two that are jumping to mind as great examples of the same situation almost exactly, because we even talked about it as a community, but very different outcomes so far. Trey McBride had a very slow start. Zach Ertz was there. He was in front of him. Zach Ertz leaves. Trey McBride breaks out in a huge way. Zach Ertz goes over to Washington. They draft Ben Sinnott behind him. People really liked Sinnott as a prospect. We were very high on him, hoping that he was going to blossom into year 2 and grow his role. And how they bring in Chigaconko, who you were just mentioning, I think somewhere along the line, whether you're going more towards the McBride or the Senate. And you might be wrong occasionally. Try to err on the side of not cutting the McBride though and holding on to Senate a couple extra weeks or something. But look, we all have roster crunches. It really depends. We get rookie fever. We want to add the new Puka Nakua or whatever we can on our waivers. So it really depends, but really try to be patient, and especially if you had a good prospect profile, then really try to be patient with them. I think that's the thing I would lean on the most if we're talking about a guy who basically redshirted his freshman season or his rookie season. Sorry.
Yeah. Sinnott is the perfect example. And the quiet part of this is, of course, almost every single prospect is going to be somewhere in between those guys and not very good. So I think we've talked through a lot of the roster construction strategy. Now we're going to move on to a little more player takey in nature, although we have a reason for this. A lot of it's process oriented. We're going to talk about some tight end risers and fallers. David, go ahead and start us off with your first tier riser.
Yeah, this was tough. I felt like we were pretty accurate with how we had our tiers last time we did this series. I do think some things changed around, and I think in particular this tier four, it kind of separated itself in a way, and I think it kind of raised in value. Kyle Pitts is the guy I wanted to highlight. He just got a massive extension. I think he's the third highest paid tight end in the league right now. I know we have some question marks about this offense, about this quarterback situation, but there's no question where he stands in this offense. And if you have a tight end who's a top two target earner on the team, you got a pretty good chance to have at least a decent tight end. You look at the spike weeks that he's had, he made people a ton of money at the end of last season. I think the knowledge that he's going to stay where he's going to be, he's not going to go to a worse team. He's not playing for the Browns or the Jets or something. And we might talk about a couple of those tight ends later. We've actually mentioned him a couple times so far. I like where he's at. I like what he's done. I feel like the consistency is there. Maybe he's not going to be that tight end one ever that we hoped he would be, but I think he's somewhere in that tight end 2 to tight end 6 probably at the end of the season. He's still pretty young, especially in a tight end premium. I think I am willing to pay a late first. Now, do I do that today? Like we've said countless times on different episodes, I'm not trying to spend a 27 first right now unless the deal just screams that I have to take it. But I think that's about where the value's at. And if I could get him by adding a second to a different player or some other way, I'm very interested in that. I actually did acquire a share, basically traded him for Kraft. There was many other pieces involved in that deal, but in my head, I just had them as a wash. So if that tells you how I think about him, I love Kraft. I think Pitts is finally settled into somewhere I feel confident that he's going to stay.
Definitely does seem to be their second option there. And that's what we're always going for. Tight end with a path to being the 1 or 2 on the team. So in some ways, I love his situation. You can make a case and that he should be viewed. Who has a better situation from a target standpoint? Pitts or Loveland?
From strictly targets, Pitts for sure.
Obviously, we love the environment of Loveland better, but Pitts does have a great situation. Of course, I think Loveland's probably also just maybe a little more dangerous than Pitts, just from what I've seen from what he's able to do. But yeah, Pitts is in a good spot. And in non-tight end premium, David, what is this? Are you willing to pay more than a mid 27 second? Are you willing to pay an early 27 second in non-tight end premium? Does he have game breaking potential?
He's shown it. May only be week to week, but yeah, if I'm competing, I need a tight end, and that seems like a pretty good value to me. Look, Kyle Pitts, someone I don't have to think twice about starting. Maybe there's a little more value there in a non-tight end premium than you need, but he gives you week winning potential even in a non-tight end premium. So I'm okay with an early second. I don't think I can use a first and non-tight end premium, even if I'm getting something back with Pitts, unless it's something really good.
I was going to ask a 1-2 swap. Any interest in that?
If it's a late first, early second, sure, because why not? But that's probably not getting offered realistically.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and move on now to my riser. And that's going to be Mark Andrews. I'm going to be honest. When I look at the tight end marketplace, there's a lot of guys that are there. I don't really care about many of them. Mark Andrews is a riser. Chig is a riser. Gunnar Helm is a riser. Mark Andrews' old teammate, likely probably a slight riser. There's a lot of risers, and I don't even know that I care that much about Andrews. I'll be honest. Every offseason, there's a bunch of guys that switch teams or their situation improves somehow or this or that. And typically speaking, most of them go somewhere new and don't do anything. So the reason I picked out of all of these guys, Andrews, is he's one of those 2 guys that I mentioned that is still in the same spot, right? So there's some chemistry there. Helm also same spot, right? But we have seen Andrews do it with his quarterback on a elite level. It's just a bet on him being able to recapture some of that magic. I think he's lost a step or 2, but he's good in the end zone when it's not raining. He doesn't have wet gloves in that game against the Bills. But it's not pretty. I guess my price here, the price here we put late 27 second. What I'm really trying to do to get Andrews is get off of the young guy for him. Can I find across my portfolio somebody who's willing to give me Andrews in a second for, like, honestly, like, a Gadsden, a Pitts, like, if it's a mid to early second, like, especially in a non-tight end premium, very excited to do that type of thing. I'd love to tear down to Andrews. Can I get off of Strange, Chig, somebody that's likely, someone who's like a riser, who's a sexier, younger name? Can I get a third? I would do a 3-4 swap. I'd love to pick that up to get Andrews, right? Because they're probably all the same guy. Andrews has a couple more years under contract here, and tight ends age well very often, and maybe more into a Zach Ertz role. So if I have to pick one of these guys, it's the cheapest one. But if they're all at price, I'd love to take advantage of tearing down to Andrews because he's a little bit lower than a lot of the other names I said.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. Like we've been talking about, when you're not, when you don't have a hammer or a potential hammer, even you're looking for that cheapest guy that you have confidence starting. Now, look, as somebody who started a lot of Mark Andrews last year through his zeros, I don't know that I can say I have confidence starting him ever again in his career. But if he's my tight end, you can do worse. So yeah, you're getting, whether you're tearing down to him or you just happen to have him and you haven't replaced him, I'm probably not adding to him to get a different Jag tight end. Why would I do that? And you're probably not picking up much to go down any further. So I think he's a really good median there. I think that's a good nail for a good target for your guy if you don't have a hammer.
All right, even though JP is not here, gonna read real quick a little bit his riser here, Sam Laporta. So his case for Laporta as a riser, 47% of new Lions OC drew pass plays last year featured multiple tight ends on the field. That's the third most amongst play callers that are going to be back this year. Sam Laporta averages zero point 0.7 fantasy points per route run when he's in a multi tight end set over the past 2 seasons. That's ranked fifth best amongst all wide receivers, at least, behind Puka, Jackson, Smith and Jigba, Devontae Adams, and Stephon Diggs. And in his 18 career games where he's had a 75% route share additionally, he's averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game with 12.9 expected fantasy points per game. In the 24 games below, he's averaged 9.8 fantasy points per game with an 8.1 expected fantasy points per game. So just JP's argument is between his name value, his youth still, he's not even 26 yet, that JP thinks he could climb about as high as tight end 3 if he has a kind of second breakout season, although he had a breakout season as a freshman. And he wanted to give a shout out to Ryan Heath and we'll put that tweet below in the episode description, for shining a light on Laporta's efficiency stats. And I got to say, JP's argument makes some sense here. He tried to buy Sam Laporta off of me in a league before he sent all this in the chat. Classic JP move. Whenever he does that, I know he's up to something. But I agree, especially now that Laporta has fallen down to a late first price tag. I'm excited to buy him at that price. 1-2 turn type of pick. A 1-2 swap, if it's a mid first, is probably not getting done. So I'd go about buying him a different way. I don't think I'm willing to move a mid first for Sam Laporta. David, any interest in doing that?
Now I kind of see him like Pitts, to be honest. Still pretty young, had some hype. He had a tight end one season. It was a weak tight end one season, but it was still a tight end one season nonetheless. So you've seen the high end difference making output from Laporta. I would just say go back to my Kyle Pitts pricing. That's about what I'm willing to spend here. I don't know if you have a preference. Let's say Laporta versus Pitts in a third. If I put the third on either side, is that the side you're taking?
I think I'm taking the third, either side. I want to have a preference for Laporta. Part of it's probably my Lions homerism. Part of it's the fact that he has been tight end one overall. He's around the same age, though, honestly, which is absolutely crazy. If we go back here, 25.7 to 25.4, when Pitts is already on his second contract at this point. But yeah, I think you just got to take the plus either way. The one thing I do say, I want to lean Laporta, but then I think about the fact that Pitts has less target competition, but then the Porter's in a better offense. So it just honestly, yeah, give me anything third or more. Either way, you're right. David, go ahead, give us your first faller because we can't be all roses.
Unfortunately, and my father is someone that I really like. He's someone I've talked about several times, how I had some exposure to him last draft season. I had a lot of exposure to him because I liked him as a prospect, and he came out and he showed that he is a good receiving tight end. Unfortunately, he also showed that he's not much of a blocker. They brought in two tight ends that are going to get some playing time. They brought in a fullback that's going to get some playing time. They have several wide receivers they want to put on the field at different times. I still think he's going to be startable where you have him, but I think he is a jag. I think he's one of these guys we were just talking about. Can I get a second and move to Mark Andrews like a decent 27 second? Probably not a playoff 27 second, but anything random or better, I'm looking to do that because I don't think he's going to be a difference maker. I don't think the opportunity exists for him to be that right now. Maybe later in his career, I do think he's a good player. He's still pretty young. As this room clears up a little bit, I think there's definitely some potential for him. I think there's going to be some big weeks, but I just think he's another guy who you're just starting and hoping for a good week. And on your bad weeks, you need to survive them.
I think I'm gonna disagree a little bit here. I don't think he's a jag. I do think that he needs to learn how to block to stay on the field all the time. He needs to get to whatever threshold percentage Harbaugh or McDaniels, whoever's actually going to make the call on who's going to be on his field, says he needs to get to. But if he could improve just enough to stay out there 70, 80% of snaps, he's a good route runner. He gets open, he can run routes down the field. If you get him in open space, he can do stuff. Right? He's like a wide receiver in a tight end's body. That's why he can't block slightly. He's more of a wide receiver than a full traditional tight end, inline tight end. The guys they brought in, Charlie Kohler, Baltimore Raven, historically just a blocker, and Njoku kind of seems past his prime. Now, while I do admit Gadsden is easily a faller from where he was at prime hysteria, sell my 27 first plus for Gadsden in tight end premium. People were probably doing that in non-tight end premium as well, amidst the absolute madness that was that 4 or 5 game stretch where he was the tight end one for a second in points per game. I think he doesn't have that bad of a situation. Keenan Allen leaving and what that's going to mean for target competition, I think, is more important than Njoku and Kohler arriving.
It's not an argument against the talent. I think he's a good player. And if he gets the snap share that you just highlighted, then I am very wrong on him being a faller. I think it's too muddy of an offense from a fantasy perspective that because of his role that I think he's going to have, that's why I think he's a jag. It's not a talent issue at all with Gadsden. I think he's a really good player. I think he's a really good receiving tight end. Is he just Dalton Kincaid, though, with a little bit more value? Kincaid doesn't have a ton less value, but are they going to be the same guy where they're 50, 60% snap share? And then when they are out there, they're running routes with Ladd McConkey and probably Quentin Johnson, maybe somebody else who's decent. And Omarion Hampton is out there. It's just really muddy for me based on what I think you can get in value, which is why I have him as a faller. But I still like him. I still have him in places. He's not a must sell for me. I think he's a good sell if you can get the right deal done.
Because when we're talking about a mid to early 27 second, unless that's like probably the 201, I'm probably pretty willing to part with that to get Gadsden in a tight end premium league and non-tight end premium. Honestly, still pretty willing to do the same thing just because I do think he does have the ability to actually do stuff. So it's an interesting question. For me, I think he's a little bit more of a value faller, but now a buy than anyone I'm looking to really move off of too often. Now, if I can get like a completely random second and like a Mark Andrews, a Strange, it's very tempting. It's probably the right process. And I have a decent amount of Gadsden, so I probably would do it in some spots, but not others to diversify. But I do want to highlight him as just a guy that if we're expecting that offense to be a lot better and we saw Mike McDaniels do it with tight ends, I think it's fair to expect him to also be able to do it with Gadsden as a tight end here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think there's going to be money to be made on this Chargers offense one way or another, whether it's getting your call on Ladd, if he's the one that hits, if Quentin Johnson turns out to be the guy there, I think he's a huge value gain in that case. I'm just not a believer. Same with Gadsden. If he ends up getting a high snap share, he's out there a lot, running enough routes. I think it's going to be a good offense. I think it's going to be a fun offense. So I don't mind taking shots at it. That's why I don't mind having some Gadsden exposure. I don't think he's going to be the hammer that we thought he might be.
I guess I don't view that as out of the range of outcomes. I just don't know that I necessarily expect it this year. I think it might be further down the line as a higher probability outcome because I do think he needs the blocking development. But that being said, moving on to my faller, Brenton Strange. It's a situation where he is the same thing as any other pretty volume driven tight end. 12.7 points per game in our 1.75 tight end premium. Tight end 17. It's not difference making, but he's 25.5 years old, which still means that he has some dynasty value. It's value that I think is misguided. Between taking Koziol and Borkircher, I can't say his name right ever, but they took a second round and a sixth round tight end. That tells me that they're not looking to extend Strange. I could be wrong, and they could extend him, and he can continue to be tight end 17, in which case I'm not upset about switching to another guy and picking up a third or something like that, right? If I can get Mark Andrews, if I can get Hunter Henry, if I can get Mike Gesicki, if I can get any starting tight end that's going to be scoring roughly the same amount of points and pick up anything, that's 100% what I want to do. They told us something with the way that they drafted, in my opinion. They told us this is not our guy for the future. Now, part of it could also be the fact that they want to play a little bit more of 11 personnel, right? They want to have two tight ends on the field more often, but that's two tight ends that they took, and one of them is just a receiving guy, honestly, in Koziol. So I think that tells me it's time to move off of him in a process deal.
Strange and a non-playoff third or Gadsden, tight end premium.
Please give me Gadsden. Absolutely.
I figured. Yeah, I'm
I'd
trying to get off
probably
Strange.
will
Go ahead.
I'm probably willing to move Strange and a truly random 27 second for Gadsden. I think that's a bet I'd probably be willing to take just because I think one guy has upside and the other guy doesn't in a tight end premium league. If it's not a early second, I have the assets to play with and spend to take a player take, and I'm okay being wrong, basically.
Yeah, that's important to have the extra second in that situation. I do agree getting off Strange. I just think that whole Jacksonville offense is going to be ugly. I think where I think there is value to be had on the Chargers offense, I'm not sure it's there on the Jags. I think it's going to be a good offense, but I'm scared of who to pick. Go ahead.
You mean it's going to be ugly from a who do I start on a week to week basis standpoint, right? Just to
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good offense. I think like Packers for many years, New Orleans Saints with Drew Brees, the Patriots with Brady for a while. Maybe there's one guy, and maybe we figure out who that is eventually, and maybe that person is right and makes you some money. But I think for the most part, there's just going to be frustrating weeks. Every 2 out of the 3, 2 out of the 4 players that you like every week's going to be frustrating. Maybe Rodriguez snipes Tootin after a big run, and then they throw BTJ a touchdown after a big Parker Washington catch, and there's a lot of mouths to feed there, and I think they're going to try to be very diverse in their formations. As we just talked about, they added 2 tight ends. One's a blocker. The third tight end is a good receiver, so they can go 3 tight ends and then have Strange and Koziel running routes and feel confident. That's a lot you can make the defense do, and it's frustrating for fantasy.
All right, and then moving on to JP's last faller, that is going to be Mason Taylor. David, go ahead and make the same case for the fact that every Jet is a faller.
That's step 1. He's a Jet still, right? Unfortunately, step 2, he's also moved down the pecking order in what was it was a weak offense, and he was okay as a rookie, nothing special. And then they add Cooper. I know Cooper's a receiver, but he's going to be doing some over the middle stuff. He's going to be doing some short work. They add Sadiq, obviously. That's a big thing for Taylor. I think you brought up Michael Mayer earlier in the show. I think that's your best bet for Mason Taylor at this point. Is you hope he gets some value somewhere, some cult following that still likes him, and you can sell him. Maybe Sadiq gets hurt, or maybe Sadiq is a little slow, and Taylor has the first couple weeks as the main tight end. If you get any sort of hint of a value spike for Mason Taylor, an opportunity to sell, I recommend doing it, even if it's at this price of a 27th third. I'm not spending that, but I'm willing to get out for that at any sign of life.
Yeah, even a 3-4 swap, I'm probably willing to do that, package him with a fourth to get up to a third. I'm very interested in buying Mason Taylor in a year because he's 22 and then he's going to be 23, then he's going to be 24 because that's how aging works, and that's when he's exiting his rookie contract. 24-year-old tight end who's got some starting experience in the NFL and then got to learn how to actually be a professional NFL tight end and blocker and plays 35 to 40% of the snaps because that's the way the offenses typically work right now is they'll want a guy out there who can do some tight end things in addition to Sadiq at times. I'm very interested in Taylor, but I'm interested in selling him and then getting him back off of waivers or for close to free as a throw in later on, like a year to 2 years from now.
If you're in leagues that don't force you to take players off the taxi, right? Once they're on there, you're allowed to keep them on as long as you want. So you have Taylor still on the taxi from last year. Are you willing to hold him through his rookie contract on your taxi, or is that just a waste of a taxi spot in your opinion?
That just depends on what else I can do with it. I would hold him over most like any undrafted tight end in this year's draft.
What about like hip
Honestly,
injuries?
if I have them all and I need to make cuts, I'm waiting as long as I can until I actually have a league cut down date to try to move any taxi squad eligible player, any player to get my roster spots down for any third, fourth that I can, right? But if I had to pick between Taylor and guys that have a better chance of getting to the top of their thing right now, I'd first shop Taylor for fourth before I'd cut him, of course. But I think I'd probably cut Taylor for Koziel, Borkercher, for Kasmerick, any of those types of anybody who I think has some sort of path to actually ascending in value. And additionally, the benefit a lot of those guys give me, David, is more likely than not by sometime next offseason before cuts are due, they will have given me some level of information on do they seem to be trending anywhere? What's the team telling me? Versus Mason Taylor, I don't think is going to tell me any new information between now and then.
Yeah, definitely just one of those tough situations for the pro. Very little chance that he does anything for fantasy over the next few years, but maybe a good sleeper candidate in the next couple years.
As long as the price is cheap, I'm happy to get him later on. Looking to get out, especially like you said, if Sadiq is injured early on. Let's move on to trades. Ooh, I love Tucker Craft. I think I said in one of our episodes, Tucker Craft to me, David, I give him a 30% chance, 25 to 30% chance to be back up as a tier 2-ish tight end by the end of this season. That being said, I'm probably pretty willing to add a 27 first to the tier 2 tight ends to get to Trey McBride. Maybe I want a little bit of a kickback. Maybe I'm just willing to pay that. So for me, this one's pretty simple. I got to take Trey McBride. Do you agree there, David? In pretty much most situations?
Yeah, it does depend on where that 27 first is. If I think it's got a shot to be an early one, we know what this 27 class can bring. I feel like you might be able to turn that 27 first into something truly difference making in season. But if this 27 first is not an early first, I think it's pretty clearly you got to go McBride, especially 2 tight end premium. You're talking about guys that just soak up targets at tight end and those premiums and how that stacks up. McBride is the prime example of that. So in a 2 tight end premium, unless that is an early first, I think it's pretty clearly you got to go McBride here.
Yeah, and then let's just approach this from a non-tight end premium standpoint. I think to get to the absolute certainty of a hammer in McBride, I'm still willing to do this in non-tight end premium. Again, with the caveat, I should have caveated that it's a mid first. It's not going to be a top 3 more likely than not. It could always get there, but it projects as truly random.
I think I'm probably more willing to do this in non-tight end premium, honestly. Just I want that difference maker in tight end premium. I'd rather go up or down from Kraft if possible, and if I can get to McBride, why not?
All right. So let's go and move on to our next trade here. Holston Loveland, who has ascended to the mid second in many startups, to CD Lamb, who has fallen to the mid second. Is this the case of getting out on time for Lamb for an ascending asset in a tight end premium league, David? Or is this the prime opportunity to capitalize on perhaps way too much overvaluing of Loveland's?
Look, I don't think it's necessarily overvalued Loveland. He's in a terrific situation. He's a very highly touted prospect for a reason. He went top 10 for a reason. He's ascending in value for a reason. I do genuinely think we're treating him, though, as if his second half of the season was the full season last year. And it just wasn't. Give me CD Lamb in this trade every time. I want the guy that I know can do it. I know he's a little bit older. I know he didn't have a terrific year last year, whatever. He was still pacing for a terrific season. He could get in the end zone a few extra times, which is always a significant amount of variance with your touchdowns. I don't think taking Loveland is going to backfire tremendously. It might even pay off. I just want the certainty of CD Lamb when it's just a one for one player deal like this. Unless I have a true positional need, even then I'm probably going Lamb because I just trust the player more. And at this value, I don't want to miss. I want the guy that I trust and I know is going to be a hammer for me.
People probably would run this by you then, David, if you're rebuilding. Does that change things? Or at that point, are you simply looking to move Lamb for something else, like a young wide receiver from this year's class and a first, for example?
I'd rather do other things in a rebuild with my Lamb, but if I've shopped around and nobody's really giving me the tear down that I want or a cash price that I'm really interested in or something, I think this is a fine move. I do think Loveland's in a great situation. I think he's a really good prospect. I just think there's a considerable amount of risk. And if I can de-risk to go to CD Lamb, unless it's a true rebuild, I'm taking Lamb. Even in a true rebuild, I'm hesitant to just make the swap.
I'm going to be leaning the same way with you. I do like Loveland. Somewhere on that board, I took him in the second round of our Scott Fishbowl draft that we were at this weekend.
And I thought you do it.
He did talk me into it, honestly, because I'm a little bit lower on him. I think this is a great way to capitalize on value that I just think is too high. You lock it into something that's not going to go down in value for the first few weeks of the point scoring season. And I think will just probably be a more sure asset. Worst case scenario, you take a mid to late first last year and you've turned it into a round two startup pick that might slowly drift down into the third, fourth over the next 3 to 4 years. So, next trade we got here Harold Fandon or Casey Concepcion and a 27 third. This says 1.5 tight end premium. Let's make it 1.75 tight end premium because I think that makes the conversation a little more interesting potentially. But I think I got to take Concepcion in the third just because I just don't know that I believe Fannin is going to be doing that much when there's other target competition there. I think he's good. I don't think there was anything for him to compete against last year. And I think Concepcion honestly has elite wide receiver one, a wide receiver one type of seasons in his, I think, future.
I think I'm going the other side on this one. And I'm a big Casey Concepcion fan as well. I think he's got a shot to be their one there. I think it's a lot easier to replace the top target earner at wide receiver on a bad offense than it is to replace a tight end that might be a difference maker. Look, I know it's a bad offense. You can make the same cases at quarterback for both of these guys, the same cases at touchdown potential, all that. I feel like it's easier to replace Concepcion, and the third really doesn't make much of a difference. Obviously, if you put the third on Fannin side, I think we both take Fannin, no question. If we remove the third, we probably still take Fannin, but it's not pulling a ton of weight here enough to make me go away from the guy that I trust at the more scarce position. Especially if we're going 175, even at the 1.5 tight end premium, I think I'm leaning Fannin, but that one's a lot more roster dependent for me.
Yeah, I think it's got to hit a 2 tight end premium before I'm taking Fannin, but I think I'm just a little lower on Fannin and a little higher on 27 thirds. No, just kidding. Of course, that's not the main point there. Next one, we have a potentially cheap entry into George Kittle, 27 second, 28 third. If they're both random, it's smash Kittle for me. If that's a non-playoff, let's see how high it could go second. I'm on the fence. If it's I know that's an early second, I'm probably taking the picks. Any differing opinion there, David?
That's basically how I evaluate the trade there. I would just say it's the off season. You don't need to rush to make a deal for Kittle unless the guy is actively shopping him. You know he's going to move him in the next few days or weeks or whatever. I'm just trying to be patient and get a little more information on how that Achilles is healing. But yeah, if we feel like he's going to play even just be on the pup for the minimum amount of time, something like that, where he's going to play most of the season, be full go by the playoffs, this is definitely a cheap way to get a tight end hammer.
And like we said earlier, there's not a whole lot of tight end hammers out there. Now, Tony Pollard or Isaiah Likely in full tight end premium. I know which side I'm taking 10 times out of 10 here, David. Did you start Tony Pollard anywhere last year?
Probably. I don't know. I'm in some leagues where we got some deep leagues out there, man. He actually didn't have a terrible season. I agree that if you're leaning likely there 10 times out of 10, I'm taking likely myself. That Tennessee backfield is just ugly right now. If I really need a running back, I'm okay moving likely for one. I'm just looking for a slightly better one.
Yeah, with the fact that Likely was a little bit of a fantasy darling and is now in a situation that people think is a good one, I'm definitely just aiming higher than Pollard. Agree with you, though. I don't mind switching him for a running back if that's something I need to do for my team. And assuming this might be our last trade here, Khalil Shakir or Gunnar Helm. Two tight end premium, David. Does positional need actually factor in here?
Not really, because if you're counting on Khalil Shakir as a starter or Gunnar Helm as a starter, you're in a bad situation. I think this is a fine way to try to get out of Khalil Shakir while there's maybe still some illusion of value. I don't know what his role is going to be. I don't expect him to be someone you're confident starting even in PPR leagues. He was a flex play last year. I just don't see that being the case this year. So yeah, if you can turn him into Gunnar Helm, who probably going to be startable in a pinch in a two tight end premium, I'm okay doing that.
Yeah, additionally, this is a start 9. Even if it's a start 10, start 11, I think Helm was doing stuff when Chig was there last year, near the end of the year. I think Shakir probably is trending down, just given DJ Moore. I love some Bell, Skylar Bell that they brought in there. It's just going to be a murky, crowded wide receiver room. I think you just want to go wide. You want to go tight end here. I think you gave the advice maybe in our wide receiver video, maybe it was in an RB video in one of the trades. And that advice that you gave, David, which is great advice, is anytime you can move a wide receiver for an RB in about the same spot, if that wide receiver is not someone you want to start, that's a great process. And I think that same advice just fits right here. Anything else you want to add about the position, David? Anything to follow up on, or we ready to thank the fine people?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this time of year, it always feels the same. We've got a little hope, and hopefully that holds with these young guys. But don't be surprised if we're disappointed in Harold Fannin and Tyler Warren and maybe Kraft or Laporta or whatever. Tight ends always suck.
Maybe Loveland. That I just like to be right, so we'll see. Don't we all, though? All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dyno Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Dyno Construction Podcast, until next time.